Good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome along to our AWARE webinar series, which takes place on the second Wednesday of every month. And I'm delighted this afternoon to welcome along three people with a huge amount of experience and expertise in the area of youth mental health. So the title of our webinar this month is Issues Concerning Young People and Focusing on their mental health. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is to wait a little minute before we kick off with the webinar for people to enter into the room and give you then an overview of AWARE and what we offer, and then a chance for our three panelists to introduce themselves and speak a little bit about their understanding, expertise and knowledge of the area of youth mental health. So just wait a little second for people to come along. Okay, so just to say, first of all, that we at AWARE, our mission and focus is to provide support, information and education to people who are experiencing depression, bipolar disorder and other mood-related conditions. And we do this through the provision of support services, educational programs and the wide repository of information that we have on our website in respect of depression and bipolar disorder. And for further information on all of our support and education services, please visit our website aware.ie. And just to flag with the audience this afternoon, if anyone in the audience is activated or impacted by the subject matter or material that will be discussed in the coming time, we encourage people to reach out to their GP and or a mental health professional that they may be working alongside. So it's important for us to say that in relation to people's well-being and care. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves and their areas of work and their interest and what they might, and after that we'll talk a little bit about what they want to share in relation to young people and mental health. And if I can invite you, Orla, first to introduce yourself to the audience this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. My name is Órfhlaith McLoughlin. I'm a counselling psychologist and I'm currently the deputy head of the counselling service in the University of Limerick. So yeah, I've been working for a number of years now with young people in particular. And I suppose I'm really interested in compassion focused therapy and bringing that, I suppose, area of interest to my work with young people. And also understanding, I suppose, the different situations that students might encounter in terms of their social circumstances or their cultural circumstances that might impact on their mental health as well, and just helping them really make sense of and understand their mental health and what might be going on for them. So I'm really excited to be here today and looking forward to chatting and to discussing all things youth mental health.
Thanks, Orla. Thank you. If you move over to Cian and to introduce yourself, Cian, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, my name is Cian Ahern. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm also the clinical manager here in Jigsaw Limerick. Jigsaw Limerick is a service for young people aged 12 to 25, and I've been here for about 5 years now. My interests would be in being as person-centered and collaborative as possible with young people in kind of helping them on their journey with their emotions and their well-being. I look at the work from a trauma-informed lens, a social justice lens, and I've done quite a bit of work with a particular framework that's been kind of developed and published in the last couple of years called the Power Threat Meaning Framework. So I'll probably call that the PTMF as we go along today if it does come up. But yeah, it's just maybe a critical way of looking at mental health and helping young people to maybe find meaning in their experience and look at some of the social context that might be having an impact as well. So that's me.
Thank you, Cian. Thank you very much. And lastly, over to Ian.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Delighted to be here this afternoon. My name is Ian. I am CEO of an organization called Community Creations, and we run two services. One is SpunOut, which has been around since 2005, and it's Ireland's youth information service. And I guess the goal in SpunOut is to provide information to young people that's accessible, non-judgmental, that's relevant to their lives in order to help them kind of figure out various things that might be going on. So there's a breadth of information there. It's kind of across a whole range of issues, and it's holistic in the sense that, you know, most of the issues affecting young people's mental health are issues that are outside maybe the realm of mental health. So that's kind of cognizant of that. The second thing then is in 2019, we noticed kind of the need for an accessible helpline for young people in a medium that kind of young people feel native and comfortable to. So we've started off with texting. We hope to have WhatsApp and other means over the course of the next year or so, but it's called 50808, and we've engaged in over 106,000, I think, conversations with young people to date since we started. It's open to all ages, but 80% of texters are under 34, and it's a really interesting kind of service to be able to see kind of real time what's going on for people all across the country. So yeah, I'm just really delighted to be here and looking forward to sharing some insights from hopefully our service that are interesting, and really much more looking forward to hearing what Cian and Órfhlaith have to say. So thanks for having us, Stephen.
Very welcome, and thank you everyone in that regard. And I suppose to start off, if I was to ask the panel, you know, specific to now, you know, the third decade of the 21st century, what are the most prevailing issues right now, you know, in 2022 that are impacting on the young people of Ireland and their mental health, you know, and what do you see going on in the different organizations that we have present today? So whoever in the panel wants to have a go at answering that question to see where that leads to.
Yeah, I don't mind kicking off, Stephen. I guess kind of the most prevalent issues that we see affecting young people's mental health are kind of their security, you know, generally, whether that's work, their safety, their sense of belonging or their purpose and things like that. So it can kind of cut across a range of issues at the moment. And Órfhlaith know more about this in terms of students, but, you know, third level students or second level students, lots of issues around cost of living, and that was present before kind of anything happened with, you know, the war or energy prices and things like that, or the kind of increase in inflation after the pandemic kind of finished. So we're seeing lots of kind of related kind of stress and anxiousness around things like that. Also kind of it was, you know, Jigsaw funded the My World survey, and in the most recent version, what was really interesting was that future was emerging as a stressor or kind of a risk factor for young people's mental health. And so really kind of what we hear a lot in conversations with young people is that kind of need to feel like they're getting good quality work, that they're going to be working in an area that has purpose, that, you know, they're going to be able to, you know, be secure and have their needs met and things like that. Another issue that's coming up in that area, and we ran a campaign a couple of weeks ago that we just were really kind of blown away by how much interest there was, and it was around burnout. And so, like, often when we think about burnout, we think about people who've been working for a good few years or things like that, whereas actually lots of college students kind of reporting burnout, particularly over the past 2 years, because, you know, immediately when we moved to the online stuff, it was kind of straight to, you know, assignments instead of exams. And like one student, you know, that came to us that was in really significant distress, basically was, you know, had moved from a situation where they had some exams and some assignments to 16 assignments all due on the same day, and kind of institutions were slow to kind of realize the pressure that students were under. Generally then speaking, like, I mean, I think like isolation and loneliness has been creeping up, even actually as this year has progressed. from kind of January, it was in and around 17% of kind of the number of young people who were getting in touch with us, to last month being 20%. And I think that's really interesting, because society has only opened up more since January as opposed to, you know, anything else. And
paradoxical in some sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it speaks to like and I think that it was, you know, loneliness was always a top presenting issue for lots of youth mental health services, even before the pandemic. It just speaks to kind of that need for young people to get connection and to feel like part of a group and be, you know, find their tribe and things like that. So I still think that that's a perennial kind of issue that seems to be affecting a lot of young people. And then just maybe I could, there's a long list, but I'll shut up. But the other issue kind of we're seeing a lot more concern about is young people who are talking to us about racism that they're experiencing in their community, and LGBTI plus young people who are experiencing more discrimination. And that's kind of been increasing over the past number of months. And it's I think what's been concerning young people is that they're seeing intolerance manifest, maybe that was always there, but they weren't experiencing, and it wasn't impacting on their sense of safety and things like that. So there's loads more to talk about, but that's kind of just some of the few kind of issues, particularly in the last 3 or 4 months, that we've been seeing kind of coming up, that have been either increasing or kind of becoming more prominent.
Helpful to hear the themes and what you're seeing on the ground and the presenting issues. Is that something that resonates, or that you can identify with Órfhlaith and Cian in relation to Jigsaw and the counselling service at the University of Limerick?
Yeah, absolutely, very much so. And I think what's really interesting from our perspective is that when we look at the main reasons that students present to the service, they normally name things like anxiety and low mood. So they would be the top 2 presenting issues. But actually, when we sit with students and we unpack what is feeding into that sense of anxiety or those feelings of low mood, it covers a lot of what Ian is talking about in terms of big issues this year would be accommodation difficulties, the stress and the strains associated with that, financial issues as well, the cost of living rising and things like that. And even over the past number of years, I suppose financial issues have been becoming more of a concern for students. And again, that adds into their feelings of anxiety, uncertainty, insecurity. And I suppose when you think about basic needs, you know, even before we start getting on to talking about mental health needs, if you think about a person's basic needs for, you know, safety, security, in terms of a roof over their head, you know, financial means to do all that all feeds into the mental health concerns. Then, of course, if those basics aren't there. And then further to that, of course, in terms of re-emerging from or adjusting to this new life we have with COVID, there has been, you know, in terms of the anxiety, a lot of difficulties for people in terms of coming back on campus, you know, back into big groups of people, socializing again, whereas some might have felt quite a comfort in being able to be at home and left to their own devices. In a sense, there's that piece of anxiety around that transition back, that adjustment back to society and to college life. And also, I suppose, there's very much that sense actually that Ian mentioned as well, around trying to reconnect, belonging, finding where they fit, particularly for first year students coming in who haven't, or who are now second year students who've actually maybe had difficulties making friends because of the online aspect and all of that, who are now finding that difficulty and maybe finding their tribe, as Ian says, where they belong, where they fit. So there's that piece. And also more generally then, I suppose, as obviously a university counselling service, students are concerned about their college experience, their exams, managing the pressures and the demands of work, but also the transitionary piece out of university. So there's a lot more insecurity or uncertainty maybe about what the future holds for particularly final year students and things like that. And yeah, I suppose we're seeing increased numbers of students accessing the service. That doesn't necessarily indicate that their mental health is worse. It can be as a result of people maybe holding off accessing services over COVID that are now back into face-to-face services. It also is as a result of, I suppose, increased numbers of students as well. But also there is, I suppose, additional issues coming to the fore as I've mentioned, some of them. So all of that is a perfect storm in terms of people accessing services. And I'll maybe not get into this now, maybe it's something we'll come to in a while, but I suppose what we're really interested here as well is in the student counselling services, how do we activate the systems around young people to support them as well? Because even if you look at the My World survey data, which Cian probably knows off by heart at this stage, but in terms of the My World survey data, if you look at it, there's a decrease in the percentage of students who perceive there to be one good adult available to them. And there's more of a percentage of students or of young people seeking professional support. So I'm really interested in what's happening in terms of our system and equipping, I suppose, the system around young people to be able to hold them and contain them through these difficulties and challenges that they're facing in their day-to-day lives as well. So, yeah.
You, Orla. The three words that are resonating, or four, should I say, is, meaning, purpose, connection, and group, and how society deeply impacts us, and that we can't avoid being, none of us, regardless of our age, being impacted by what's going on societally for us here in Ireland and also globally, as has been mentioned. Just for the audience, Cian, and trusting, of course, your expertise in it, if you'd like to flag it's the My World survey, isn't it?
Yeah,
that got Jigsaw conducted. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, well, the guys have both referenced it there. I probably wasn't even going to, but look, it's a two-stage survey there was a gap of several years between, so they can now kind of compare the generation of young people from, I think, 10 years ago or so to more recently, and like the guys have said, increases in anxiety and decreases in the perception that they might have a supportive adult available to them as well, but also just indicating that a supportive adult in itself is a real helpful systemic support and structure that a young person can have in their lives. I was just reflecting on some of the things that Ian and Orla were saying, and I think they're dead right that first and foremost, when there are things like poverty, inequality, financial issues, pandemics, wars, you can't but expect young people's emotions and mental health and well-being to be affected by those things. They are big structural things that are having a massive impact every day. So that's right there at the core, and it's a kind of a background noise in every presentation that a young person might have coming to services. And then, like you kind of reflected, Stephen, things like connection and group and tribes and stuff like that. I think where that comes up for us is in almost every presentation, there is some kind of crisis of identity that a young person is going through on some level, finding where their place is in the world, who they are, what meaning to take from their life and their experiences, and where that kind of comes to the fore with their emotions, their well-being, is this pressure to be perfect. Actually, I think that's what we see more than anything is, like Orla said, looking to the future, having the perfect job, looking the perfect way, comparing themselves to their peers at all times and trying to find out, am I doing this right? Am I doing life right? Because they all seem to have it together, whereas I'm struggling every day. So what's that about? There must be something wrong with me here.
A performative anxiety almost, Cian.
Yeah, big time. And we're talking about young people here, but I see that in everyone. There's this sense of having to portray the perfect self to the world, and it's not okay to show yourself as vulnerable or going through a tough time or not coping perfectly with everything that comes your way.
This is one of the messages that we try to convey here too, is that to convey, and vulnerability actually develops and is protective of one's mental health. And I think it's important to broaden it out a little bit, maybe not for our discussion, that some of the issues, and thanks for flagging that, Cian, that affect young people's mental health is across the lifespan as well. Obviously there's different particular issues specific to young people, you know, and the age ranges of people you're working with in your services. But yeah, that's speaking specifically to that kind of anxiety about portraying the perfect self and what that means to people, regardless of their age and trajectory in life. Very good. I was thinking about it in relation to, just to move it on a little bit, around mental health, and we are so enthused, you know, to have you three along, and also to continue a conversation around mental health in a general sense. Do you see that there's further work, and if so, how can we go about doing it to kind of reduce the stigma around mental health? You know, how do we go about doing that if it is a factor?
I think the point that you and Cian were just making, Stephen, around that feeling okay to be vulnerable and displaying vulnerability with your peers, right? What's really interesting is that most people get in touch with 50808 because they want to talk to somebody that doesn't know them, and then most people afterwards are saying how helpful it was to have their feelings validated and heard. And it's kind of like, well, if everyone was just doing that with each other, wouldn't that be such an empowering kind of space for people? And people might feel less like, as Cian was saying, kind of, you know, that they're the only one that doesn't have it figured out. You know, often what we find, even when, you know, we were starting out with the SpunOut service and doing things like having young people share their lived experiences, you know, other young people then reading those lived experiences and saying, oh, actually, yeah, I'm not the only person who's going through X, Y, or Z. There are other people out there, and it makes makes young people feel less alone. So I think for what's interesting, and we did some research about this kind of in terms of what would make young people more likely to talk more about their mental health or to reach out for support around their mental health. And kind of the one thing that came through from it for me was this piece around, well, what's the benefit going to be to me? And I think, you know, not enough services and not enough campaigns talk about the benefit of talking. You know, this kind of, it's okay not to feel okay. That's incredibly validating, obviously, but I think we need to move the conversation on a little bit and focus on, well, actually, what is the benefit? If I talk to somebody, you know, and it may not always work, even, you know, in terms of counselors and stuff like that, you have to find one that fits and that you can vibe with and all that sort of thing. But what's the benefit for me going to be if I do display vulnerability, I think we just need to kind of focus on that and tell that story a little bit more for young people to see that it's okay and to kind of create that safe space. That's just kind of one of the things that I've seen anyway.
Thank you, Ian. You know, so how you might benefit. So you're talking about that, and I was interested in doing some research for this webinar. You know, Jigsaw's one of your strategy or your goals is to improve the mental health outcomes for people who are accessing your service. So we're into that kind of sphere now in the conversation around both tangible, so real life changes, but also maybe some things that are, you know, a little bit more intangible, that it's a developed kind of awareness around yourself, and you know, a deeper understanding of knowing yourself as a person. And that comes from living life, but it also comes from the intervention of counselling, psychotherapy, etc., and by people reaching out for help, you know, regardless of the service, I think. Yeah, very good.
I'd say some of it is knowing yourself as a person, and personal development and talking and reaching out are all really important as well. But there's also a sense, I guess, that we would encourage is learning to use your voice as well, and to speak up when things aren't right. Because what we're finding is young people are placed in structures and systems that are really very unjust, and like Orla was saying, can put an awful lot of pressure on young people without kind of paying heed to what it might mean for a young person who is struggling with several other things and then are given 16 assignments on one day, you know. But we live in a society where performance, achievement, academic achievement, jobs, busyness, that's currency. That's the world that young people have been kind of dropped into, and they're kind of told, look, figure that out there for yourselves, learn to survive, talk to someone. You know, you might have to wait several months for a service, or you might talk to a friend and they'll shun you, but you know, talk to someone and they'll figure it out, rather than us as a society and as a government and a country saying, actually, no, there's a whole lot of stuff that's not okay here that needs to be figured out first. And it's not the young person's fault. It's not their fault that they're like their resilience isn't strong enough, or they don't have the right coping skills or something like that. You know, they're very naturally feeling anxious because they're in very naturally anxiety provoking situations. So we're trying to maybe open up some of those lenses and to help young people use their voices to kind of stand up and say, this is not right, guys. You know, this isn't okay. It needs to change.
Message of empowerment, I suppose, isn't it, Cian? You know, to try and access and empower young people to use their voice, to raise their concerns about life, living in Ireland now in the 21st century, and what issues relate to their mental health and overall health and well-being, not just mental health, but the people as citizens of the country.
Yeah, and when you talk about stigma, I guess us as adults probably need to step up to the plate and say, look, we've gotten some of this stuff wrong, really, and you know, we really need to acknowledge that young people are dead right to be feeling the way they're feeling, and we need to start to change some of that ourselves. It's not up to young people to change a stigma or to figure out mental health. You know, we're the ones that have kind of left them with this country with these kind of structures that they're trying to navigate without any map. So
thank you, Cian. Orla, would you like to jump in there?
Yeah, Cian just took the words out of my mouth there, the last few sentences, in terms of when we think about stigma or when we think about young people's mental health, the question we're often asked is, you know, what's wrong with young people today? What's wrong with their mental health? But actually that destigmatization, or that the answer to that question starts with exactly what Cian was saying. You know, how are we as adults contributing to either bettering young people's mental health or contributing to its worsening, I suppose. And again, it's exactly those things. Like, we have a responsibility as leaders, as politicians, as adults, as parents, as, you know, coaches, as, you know, whoever we are in young people's lives, to think about what we do and how we do it is impacting on them, and starting at that point. And then helping young people understand their reactions to those societal systems or political systems or financial economic systems that of course make sense in that context, you know. So of course, as Cian was saying, students or young people feel anxious if they're in systems or if they're in circumstances that are anxiety provoking or uncertain or unjust or unfair for them. And exactly as well, I suppose, helping young people to be their own advocates as well, in a sense, and as being able to identify, this is what's wrong in the system as opposed to this is what's wrong with me, because that's what we hear from young people coming in, is there's something wrong with me. And actually, when we step back and reflect on it with them, it's actually about, no, there's something wrong with what's going on in my life at the moment. As a
very good. Yeah, that sounds very helpful, Laura. Yeah, because in one sense, I suppose, developmentally and as adults, you know, and for some people accessing your services, they're not necessarily, they're under the age of 18, so they're adolescents or they're teenagers. But for over 18, there's the constant encouragement for us to step up, and some of that might be, as you're alluding to earlier, Cian, performative, you know, to take individual responsibility or ownership. And yet it's not all about that. You know, it's about thinking about ourselves as people in a system or people in society. So kind of, I'm thinking about it, listening to you, as a both and, you know, we're individuals, but we're also part of a society. And there's that reciprocal impact of society on us and us on society. Very good. I was thinking about it in the sense just of a question that came through, and just to ask the panel that, you know, I suppose the question came from a person to say that, is there something about perfectionism that's driven by pressures of social media and your sense of that, or, you know, the perfectionism or something performative around that? And do you notice that coming up for yourselves in the work that you're doing?
My sense of it is that social media is a reflection of what's going on in society as well. Do you know what I mean? So I think social media is a vehicle through which things like perfectionism, or the emphasis on achievement, or the emphasis on, you know, being the best you can be, it's through social media that's portrayed then as such. In terms of social media being the fault of that, I'm not so sure, but it's certainly a vehicle through which I suppose young people then would, you know, I suppose intentionally maybe compare themselves to others.
Yes.
And only see the kind of that compare and despair, you know, so other people are doing much better than me, they seem to have it all together, I don't. So there's that kind of link, I suppose, is what we would see. What maybe Ian and Cian can have further insights in that.
I'd fully agree with you, Órfhlaith. It feels like social media is more like a magnifying glass for what we see in our actual lives every day. Again, it goes back to when you live in a world where currency is performance and perfection and followers and likes or whatever, you know, in real life, what that transpires to be in social media world then is that constant comparison. And you know, if you're not in that same zone, then of course you're going to feel worse or feel anxious about those things. But I wouldn't say social media is to blame. It's part of the overall picture, and it's part of the problem, but probably see it more as a magnifying glass. And again, just to kind of go back to our role in that as adults, the amount of like parents or teachers who you might come across who kind of blame social media for this or blame phones or whatever, and then in the next breath I see it myself. I'm on the phone myself, you know, a couple of hours a day, and young people see that in me, and you know, what role model or what example does that show for them? It's the very same. We're all on our phones all the time. It's not a unique to young people thing.
Very good, thank you, Cian. Do you have anything to contribute on that? Cian, sorry, Ian.
No, just to say, like, it's I agree, like it's amplifying issues that the young people are experiencing in their lives. And I would say actually it affects them more what somebody they know, you know, in terms of who's projecting that perfection or kind of that they have it all together, than, you know, an influencer. Young people are able to discern between somebody who has hundreds of thousands of followers that looks perfect. They kind of know what that's about. I don't think it's this. I think it's actually more impactful when they see people in their own lives who are projecting outwards that maybe don't have everything together, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think for me it's about that kind of comparison in everyday life as opposed to necessarily kind of social media. So yeah, I think Cian and Órfhlaith have it 100% there. Yeah.
Very good, thank you. Go on, Órfhlaith.
Right, just to say on that as well, in terms of social media. So I suppose, you know, the past number of years obviously have been very difficult for a lot of young people in terms of being quite socially isolated physically. And I suppose we all know, or we're aware of, the importance of being able to connect, and how connection with others, you know, helps us regulate our own emotions and helps us feel safe and supported and part of something else as well. So while social media gets an awful lot of bad press, and there's lots of concerns, very valid concerns as well around social media, we have seen some really beneficial aspects to social media that have, you know, in terms of opened up communications with their peers over, particularly during COVID and things like that, have allowed them to have allowed young people to stay in contact with each other. So just to say that as well, that I think there's quite often a very negative view of social media and young people being on their phones and things like that. And sometimes we may miss some of the benefits or some of the ways that it facilitates connection as well. So just to say that.
And just one last point, and not to counter that, because I agree exactly with what Órfhlaith is saying, but one really kind of small issue, but something that we're seeing quite consistently and frequently, is kind of that image-based sexual abuse. And it's not just from former partners. We're seeing a lot more folks, particularly younger men, getting in touch with us at like 3 or 4 in the morning. They've been sharing images and what have you. And that's just normal part of kind of young people's experiences at the moment. Lots of people like to sensationalize it and things like that. But where they're being kind of, then they find out it's not the person they thought it was, and they're kind of being extorted. So we're seeing kind of one of those a week at the moment, kind of, if not more, and it's just becoming kind of an issue. It's not to alarm anybody, but it's just one of those things where kind of we're having to do some kind of awareness and messaging around it for young people, so that they're aware of those, and then they are aware of those risks already, but it's kind of, it's presenting as kind of an issue for young people that they're in serious crisis. They're talking to us about things like suicide and things like that at 4 a.m, because, you know, it feels like there's kind of no one there to support them at that hour and all that sort of thing. So it's not to be alarmist, because it's a very small kind of percentage of what we'd be dealing with, but it's just something that's kind of becoming more concerning. And what we really want to see is a framework there for young people to get support and help when something like that goes wrong, and that they can get in touch with, you know, the guards who are not going to be judgmental about it, or who are not going to, you know, parents, they're not going to freak out and take the phone away or whatever, that it's just going to be meeting young people where they have that need to get something sorted, you know. So that's just a very small example.
Because it's into that, I think it's been said before, melting pot around relationships and sexuality, that all of this is happening, you know, and yeah, to normalize that, and also to think about the impact of it, and people thinking of taking their own lives or dying by suicide, and yeah, it's a very serious issue, of course, indeed. Just wanted to bring it up, the link between, it's come up in some of the feedback around the link between mental health and addiction, and you know, there's obviously the comorbid aspect to it, and how one links to another and vice versa. So what are you seeing there, or how are you going about speaking to that? Or yeah, I don't get necessarily a treatment of it, but just is the prevalence of it, and what comes of it from your own experiences on the ground within the organizations you're working in?
Yeah, I wouldn't be an expert in that area, Stephen, but when I do think of addiction, or when there are young people coming to our service using substances, I think our take on it is, what need is this fulfilling? How is this helping them to cope in some way? You know, it's not necessarily a symptom of something. It's more like a method of survival. You know, one way to, very helpful way to shut off emotions, actually, when emotions are really overwhelming. But that's the initial direction I'd be going in, is being curious as to what might this be doing for that young person, what function might it be serving. My understanding, just like informally or just from talking to people, and maybe Orla would speak more to this, it does sound like drugs and substances are a lot more freely available on campuses these days. I don't know if that's accurate or not. You might know, Orla.
We certainly hear anecdotally, I suppose, about the availability, the ease of access to drugs and substances, and particularly alcohol, which is the most frequent substance of all that's used.
Sure.
We don't tend to really think about it. But yes, I mean, drinking alcohol certainly is a big concern. In terms of our statistics, in terms of students who would present with maybe substance abuse, or maybe substance use that has become problematic for them, it's in the very low percentages that actually present to us specifically with that difficulty. I suppose what we see more of is kind of what is related to what Cian was saying, really, is that we look at what role is the alcohol or drug use playing in that young person's life. And, you know, exactly as Cian was saying, it's a coping mechanism in some way. It has some use for them in some way, and what's that doing? But also, I suppose, if someone's under a lot of strain or a lot of stress, they'll find different ways to express that. And alcohol and drug use is potentially one of those ways, you know. So yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing. Certainly anecdotally, we're seeing, and through our service, we're seeing, yes, there's ease of access to substances, but and when students do present to us with substance related issues, it's usually polysubstance use as well. So, you know, alcohol and a number of different drugs. And of course, that is having impacts on them in different ways. It's exacerbating maybe difficulties that are there already, such as financial issues, accommodation issues, relationship difficulties, you know, all of those things. So, yeah.
Thank you, Orla. In relation, there's been a few questions or comments that have come up regarding the ongoing care and support for people under the age of 18, if they're linked in with the mental health services and that has come to an end. And what kind of advice or support would you give to people to kind of continue reaching out for help, specific to your own organizations, I suppose, and what's there, what's available? And also another point came in around, you know, speaking back to your point earlier on, Ian, resonated with me around loneliness, isolation, a young person feeling alone, you know, and what kind of encouragement or support would you give to people out there who are experiencing that? So it's just to open that up to the group now.
Just on the first point around continuing care, I think, you know, like I kind of understand the context in terms of CAMHS and things like that. And I think it's going back to that piece around advocating. So kind of, you know, CAMHS are not supposed to discharge somebody unless, you know, they've completed their care plan before the age of 18. But we still see kind of inconsistency in service provision across the country where that's not necessarily always kind of adhered to. We're actually doing some work on that at the moment, researching kind of young people's experiences of transitions between different services out of CAMHS and kind of how they experience that and whether or not their care is abruptly ended maybe before it should be because of kind of, you know, the system. And that's one of the things I'm most concerned about, is that like a lot of our services are designed for the comfort of the service, the system, the clinicians, the different specialties and all that sort of thing, as opposed to what are the outcomes for young people. So I'd be kind of saying, you know, in terms of if you're in a service at the moment, you know, be asking really serious questions as to why, if that young person is in need of continued care, why they're not getting that continued care from that service. But then more broadly, I guess, it is really challenging because there's a lot of services and it's hard to navigate them. It's also costly as well, you know, if you're looking to access different types of services in the community. But I think the best thing to do is to kind of understand, you know, even if there's no kind of way back from a decision to discharge, kind of trying to understand from that service what could be appropriate for the young person next, speaking to the young person themselves, what did they think they would like. That's the most important thing. And then trying to find that in the patchwork kind of quilt of services that are, you know, that make up our system at the moment, kind of, you know. So I don't know, that's just kind of my initial thoughts on that one.
Very helpfully, and it kind of, you know, makes me think about one of, you know, in one of the lines I saw from your own website is that, you know, your information on the website is created by young people for young people. And I know Jigsaw have that ethos and value system as well, you know, around being curious about the needs of the young person themselves and what they think they need. As to whether the system can match up with that is the secondary question, but really having that open, compassionate conversation with the young person themselves is very important. Yeah, thank you.
I'd say one of the first responses to that, like, always has to be to advocate for more resources, you know, like regardless, like that, I don't know that those resources are ever going to be provided to the point where people will have quick enough access to services, but that always needs to be the first thing advocated for anyway, given the wait times across the country. And at the same time, in Limerick, there's 7-8 mental health services for young people aged 12 or 14 to 25, yet we all still have 4, 5, 6 month wait lists. So to access a free community service in Ireland, you are going to have to wait in terms of mental health, which is just really unfortunate. It would be great if there was like joined up thinking or joined up kind of plans across the country, depending on youth population. Should there be a certain amount of services based on the population in certain towns and cities? I don't see that as being the case. You would think that would be a good forward step to take. And then lastly, just you asked about our own services. Like the one thing that we do have for people who are awaiting our services, on jigsaw.ie, there's an instant chat support. So within a matter of days, you'd have access to a clinician for a full therapy session one-to-one via instant chat. Now, I know that doesn't suit everyone and it's not necessarily like a family intervention, but that's one piece where, and that's available across the country. It doesn't, you know, you don't have to have a Jigsaw service in your county for that, but yeah, it's again a systemic issue that we're faced with.
It's a theme of our discussion this afternoon. I'm getting that strong sense of it, isn't it? It's coming up a lot. There's another point made in relation to, if we can, and I was connecting into the words around empathy for parents, and trying to kind of consider the perspective of the parents of young people. And a concern came in the chat, a comment around what kind of supportive kind of guidance might you give to, and I know it's not necessarily about the young person, but the parent of it, to look after themselves. And some of my thinking on it is that the lines of communication are so important, yet between the parent or the caregiver, the primary caregiver, and the young person, and yet also for parents to think about their own needs. And does that come up for ye, and what do you do about that if it does?
Yeah, I think the way it kind of presents most to us is when young people are telling us about their experience of their parents, and most of the time the problem they're talking about is that the parent is often, because of their concern and their worry, they're not able to park that. They're not able to park that part of it when they're communicating with the young person, and that as a result manifests as kind of panic, or immediately jumping to trying to fix the problem, as opposed to just kind of creating that safe, open space for the young person to talk about what they're experiencing. And I think it's true for anybody who's supporting anybody. Like, you can't fill from an empty cup, so like you have to kind of take care of yourself, and you have to feel well too. So
very good.
I'm not saying that in an uncompassionate way towards parents, but I think it's just kind of, and it's really easy for all of us, like, I mean, I'm not a good role model myself, when somebody reaches out, like, your concern drives you to want to jump in and fix the issue, as opposed to just sitting there. So I think kind of all of us learning to be, better listeners, and then, rather than maybe kind of, I think being better advocates then out in the world for our children or young people, as opposed to, kind of maybe, a lot of the time what we hear from young people is parents telling young people what to do, as opposed, so maybe channeling that energy into telling the system what the system should do, maybe. But maybe that's
internalizing it, maybe, and telling yourself, or with a trusted relationship that a parent might have, if they have that, to tell them, like, to have that conversation to see about accessing support and help for themselves, because that's of benefit. Thank you, Ian. Orla, do you have anything to say on that? Does it come up a lot in University of Limerick Counselling Service?
I suppose less so in the student counselling service, in that we'd have less interaction with parents, because most of who we'd be supporting through the service are over the age of 18. But absolutely, we do have contact with parents in certain situations and things like that. But absolutely, I suppose I have huge empathy for parents in terms of trying to navigate the minefield of what's out there in terms of mental health at the moment, and what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, what they should be saying, what they shouldn't be saying. It's really, really difficult. So I think Ian points out a really important piece there in terms of that kind of needing to put on your own oxygen mask first. Parents are so busy. They encounter a lot of the same struggles systemically and from a societal aspect that we all do. So being able to slow down, being able to tap into their own, I suppose, resources, linking in with others, getting support for themselves in the first instance. And then I suppose the most basic thing is just being available to that young person. I mean, the value of that cannot be underestimated, in terms of literally all young people want sometimes is to know that they've been heard and that somebody understands them. So being able to park some of that concern and those worries that drive you to want to fix it, or drive you to invalidate something. So, oh no, you don't feel like that, sure, you'll be fine, or, whatever. And just validate, actually, this is really difficult, what you're going through at the moment. And I really hear that. And then also there's a piece around, like, that's a skill in itself. It's not something, you know, that comes very naturally to us sometimes. So there are opportunities as well for parents to kind of skill up in that area of kind of active listening. And
very good, Órfhlaith.
Yeah, there's different resources, and we can share some as well afterwards. That might be helpful for useful for parents to link in with.
I'd agree entirely with Órfhlaith and Ian. I think like the most important message, and 9 times out of 10 is the issue that we're bringing to parents when they come into sessions here, is, look, it's not about solving the problem for the young person. Actually, first and foremost, you need to find a way to sit with them in that. A young person, no young people are coming into our service wanting their parent to solve whatever issue is going on for them. They just want their parent to listen, to take them seriously, sit with them, and be with them in that, and actually feel that with them in that. And I think that's easy enough for me to say, or for us to say. What I'm presuming parents are saying here, though, the issue behind that question is how difficult that can be, actually, how difficult it can be to find enough space in their own lives to be able to do that, or enough groundedness in their own lives on a daily basis to do that. And because it can be really difficult, actually, it would be a lot easier if we could just solve the issue straight away, tell the young person what to do. If you just do this, you'll be fine. And wouldn't that be great if we actually had solutions like that? It's not the way it works. So what has to happen is for parents and families to change their system, to change even the schedule on a weekly basis, so that they can find space, firstly for themselves, so that they get grounded, and then they actually have the space and the awareness and the groundedness to sit with the young person. I live in a very busy household myself, with lots of stuff going on for our kids every day of the week. And like, I don't mean to be kind of glib about this stuff, but one piece of advice that can really change the entire structure of your emotional availability during the week is Sunday evening, sit down, plan out the week, see where there's going to be space for you, see where there's going to be some level of self-care for you, even if it's just once in the week, and then know that when that's there, you have some piece of groundedness, that you're going to be able to have your space, and then you can be with your young person at other times throughout the week. I know it's a simple enough piece, but in terms of practical advice, I couldn't recommend that highly enough.
Just a quick word. There was a query coming in relation to the impact of being an only child, and what your sense of that is. Is there, you know, obviously that's the makeup of a specific family, and lots of families out there, you know. What's your sense of that, you know, that family dynamic? Is there anything to be concerned about, or, you know, mental health wise, or it depends on the family, the individual family itself, I dare say?
Yeah, I'm not, like, I'd say we're all kind of pensively sitting here wondering about that, because it's probably not something that comes up too much. You know, it can be a lonely space for some young people, and particularly the last couple of years, I imagine the household can be that little bit more lonely if there aren't siblings around. But again, we're kind of going back to young people finding their tribe and finding their community, and, you know, the child that's raised by the community rather than the household itself.
And as we go on, Ian, no, go on, please.
No, I was just going to say, like, you know, the grass is always greener as well. You know, like in a family environment, you can have siblings who are feel like they're competing against each other, and all these other different dynamics. So, like, you know, it absolutely kind of, I agree with what Cian was saying, but then at the same time, like there's other issues maybe for other family types or sizes and things like that as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And to kind of, I know we're thinking about society and the system, and as we head towards the end of our time this afternoon, folks, just to end with in the spirit of kind of thinking, you know, from a hopeful perspective of what are your hopes, and what hope do you see for the future of the society, without getting too broad about it or rhetorical, you know, creating something in that. But, you know, the hope for young people, what do you see, you know, developmentally in that regard, you know, for the young people of Ireland that you're working with, that your organizations are working with day in, day out, month in, month out?
it's kind of been threaded through some of our discussion. But the thing for me, the hope for me, or the change that I would love to see, if anyone could take anything from what we've talked about today, it's what Orla mentioned around young people and adults realizing and seeing that it's not what's wrong with young people, it's not what's wrong with youth mental health, it's what's happening to young people, what is going on in their lives every day that is making them feel that way. For young people to start to be able to move away from that self-blame as well, you know, that they're not internalizing this message that there's something wrong with me if I'm feeling anxious or if I'm feeling vulnerable, and that they get to they start to see the structural and systemic impacts of things that are having an effect on them. So it's not what's wrong with them, it's what's happened to them. You know, it's not what symptoms do they have, it's what are they doing to cope, what are they doing to survive. That gives me hope. If that narrative starts to develop and become more commonplace, then I feel like we're starting to get into a better place and to move that discussion on a bit further as well.
Thank you, Cian. Orla?
Totally, I absolutely agree with Cian. And also, I suppose, just from working with young people and young adults every day, I suppose my overwhelming kind of feeling about it all is that, you know, the future of the world is in really safe hands with the young people that we meet on a day-to-day basis. The passion, the resources they have within themselves, their hopes for the future. They honestly, every day, they really just challenge me and make me think about, gosh, I could be doing a lot better here, you know, in terms of my own approach to life and things like that. But also, I think a really key piece that I'd love to see is the involvement of young people much more in our systems, because they know a lot of the time what the issues are and have lots of ideas on how things could be better. So I'd love to see us involve young people a lot more in our systems and let them, empower them to be that piece of that change as well. Yeah.
Orla. And last word to you, Ian.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think like what's encouraging for me is that I see young people talking about how they're fed up and that they're not happy with the way the system works in a variety of different spaces. I think climate's a really good example of that. They've put that firmly and squarely on the agenda. But I think, you know, I think they're talking more about intergenerational equity now. The social contract is a thing of the past at the moment. So I'd really love to see kind of young people challenging that in a way that kind of upends the system a little bit. And for me as well, like I think just more broadly in terms of youth mental health, I'm hopeful, but I'm not necessarily optimistic because I'm a realist as well, that the system starts to put young people and their outcomes at the center of you know, any changes, rather than like, you know, what's best for the system or the service or things like that. And I'm starting to see some of that happen. I think the thing that I have an issue with is the urgency around some of that change. But yeah, I'm hopeful for things like that. But yeah, we'll see. I think you know, for me, what kind of gives me a lot of hope is that young people are just not accepting kind of anything and they're challenging everything. And I'm very energized by that.
Powered voices. Very good. Very, very hopeful indeed. I'd like to thank you all, Orla from the Counselling Service and Student Wellbeing Service in the University of Limerick, Cian Ahern from Jigsaw Clinical Manager in Limerick too, and Ian Power, CEO of Community Creations, which hosts SpunOut, and text 50808 for your considered wisdom and knowledge and answering the questions that came through from the audience and from myself. So, you know, helpfully, you know, and openly. So thank you very much indeed for that. And just to say to the audience again, you know, to reiterate, if you've been impacted by anything that has come up, please reach out to the organisations that we're working alongside. Obviously, Orla is specific to the Student Counselling Service in the University of Limerick, but jigsaw.ie, spunout.ie, and our own organisation, aware.ie, and also to mention any other mental health professional and your GP are there to speak to should the need arise. Our June webinar, is the title of it, is going to be Mental Health in the LGBTI plus community, and that'll take place on Wednesday the 8th of June at 12 noon. And for further information around getting our newsletter, you can access that on aware.ie/webinars. again, just to thank you all as the panel for this afternoon's discussion. And I wish everyone a lovely afternoon and to enjoy the nice weather ahead. Cheerio for now.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.